Hello Year 9. So in this lesson I'm going to show you how to factorise. So remember, factorising is the opposite of expanding. Factorise the difference of two squares. So we're going to work backwards to something that we did last week. So if you're looking for these notes on OneNote, I'm under Term 3 and the first one's set for Week 4 that's under Algebra. Factorising difference of two squares. Before I start, I'm just going to remind you what we did last week. So last week we were expanding, which meant removing brackets, and you could use FOIL, you could use your rectangles and putting the areas in. So with this first one here, we've got x plus 1 times x minus 1. You could put in your little arrows. We're going to do first, outside, inside, last. So that's going to give me x times x is x squared, x times negative 1 is minus x, the plus 1 times x is plus x, and plus 1 times negative 1 is minus 1. Now the one key thing that happens here is those two middle terms will cancel out in all these ones that are on the screen right now, because the brackets are identical except one has a plus, one has a minus. Doesn't matter which order the plus and minus are, as long as they're identical except for a positive and a negative. So all I'm left with is x squared minus 1, and that's the answer to that first one. So I'm just going to use the shortcut on the next one. The two brackets are identical, one's positive, one's negative. So the first term squared will be x squared. It will always be a subtract sign in between, and the 3 times 3 is 9. But because we're actually doing positive 3 by negative 3, that's why we always get a negative answer, and 3 squared is 9. So I haven't shown the extra step of working, I'm just using the shortcut. In C, it's going to be the first term squared minus the last term squared. So when I simplify that, I get x squared minus 16. Done. You may have a bracket that has something else in front of the x, like these last two further down. So I'm just going to show you how we do those. It's still going to be, because the brackets are identical except for the positive negative, it will be the first term squared. Now that's also the 3 being squared, not just the x, minus, and it will be the last term squared. So if I simplify this first one, I get 9 because it's 3 squared, and the x will also be squared. Take 4. And then my last one, squaring the first term, you can skip the bracket part like I've been doing, but 5x when you square it will give you 25x squared. It will be a minus sign, and 4 times 4 is 16. So they're the ones that we were doing last week, and they're called the difference between two squares, because we end up with, just highlight this one, I get a perfect square minus another perfect square. That's where the word difference of perfect squares comes from. So all you're going to be asked to do today is work backwards. You're going to be given a perfect square minus a perfect square, and we want to put it into the two brackets. So keep in mind, one bracket will be positive and one will be negative. So these are the notes that I want you to copy down for today's lesson into your summary book. So in your summary book, the heading is Factorising the difference of two squares. So factorising, putting it into brackets. There is a rule here that if you've got a perfect square minus a perfect square, then it's going to be just the a plus b and an a minus b. So I just want you to jot that down first. And then 5 little examples we're going to do, and then there's a worksheet for you to practice. So in these examples, the first one, in A, we've got x squared minus 4. So some of you will be able to work through a little bit quicker. That's okay. I'm going to put it, because x squared is obviously a perfect square and 4 is a perfect square, it means I'm going to put into two brackets. One's positive and the other will be negative. And it's the square root of each of these things that goes in the bracket. So the square root of x squared is just x. So x is at the front of each bracket, because when you multiplied it, it gave you x squared. And the 4, the square root is 2. That's all I need you to do. That is x squared minus 4, all squared. Let's try B. We've got 9a squared, all of that is a perfect square, minus 25. If it helps you to see what the perfect square is, I'm going to write it this way. 3a if I square it, gives me 9a squared. Minus, well, the 25 must have been 5 squared. You don't have to write that line. I'm just doing that so you can see what goes into my brackets. Perfect square minus a perfect square means I'll have two brackets. One will be positive, one will be negative. I could have put the minus sign first, then the plus. And the 3a and the 5 are what goes in. So 3a is at the front of the bracket, 5 is at the end. Done. C. We have 81 x squared minus y squared. And you should recognise 81 because 81 is 9 times 9, 9 squared. So I have difference of two squares. Two brackets, one will be positive, one will be negative. I'll change the order this one. 81 x squared, its square root is what goes at the front, so 9x. And if you didn't know what the square root of 81 is, you can use your calculator. Square root of 81, it will give you 9. So 9x at the front of the brackets. To get the y squared, it must have been y and y. That's your answer. With D, this one's a little bit different. So I might just put a little asterisk. As long as you get those first few, you're doing really well. In D, we've got 2b squared minus 32. The 2 and the 32 are not perfect squares. So I'm going to put a little note here. We are going to look for the highest common factor first, before we start. If we do that, then this might work out a little bit nicer for us. So what we did last lesson was looking for the largest thing that goes into the 2b squared that also goes into the 32. And that highest common factor in this one is 2. They're both even numbers, so 2 goes in. So what I will do first is take the 2 out. So this is from our lesson last Friday. If I take the 2 out the front, it will leave me with b squared, because you say to yourself, what do you times 2 with to get 2b squared? I need the b squared. There's a minus sign. And what do I times 2 with to get 32? It needs to be 16. Now if I look in that bracket is the difference between two squares. I've got a perfect square minus another perfect square. So just leave this 2 out the front. Forget about him now. He stays there. And to factorise the other, it's going to go into two brackets. One's plus, one's minus. And put the square roots in there. So it'll be b plus 4 and b minus 4 to give you b squared minus 16. So sometimes you just have to do an extra step so it looks what you need it to look for. And your final one is x plus 1 all squared, take away 4. Let me double check that was the question. Yep. So for this one here, I do have something squared minus another perfect square. So it's the difference of two squares. I'm going to have two brackets. I'll make them a bit longer in this one. You'll see why. One bracket is plus, one bracket is minus. Let me start with the 4. Let's go backwards. The square root of 4 is 2. So at the back of this bracket, one's positive 2, one's minus 2. But the term at the front, the bracket I have is x plus 1 all squared. So if I square root that, I'm just left with that bracket, which is x plus 1. So I'll have the x plus 1 at the front and the x plus 1 at the back. Now it is in a bracket. If you want to keep it in a bracket, you can, but you don't actually need to. So if I ignore that bracket, I'm going to end up with x plus 1 plus 2, and you are allowed to add the two numbers together, which is going to make it x plus 3. And in the other bracket, if you do the 1 take away 2, it's going to give you negative 1. So it's x minus 1. That one's a little bit trickier in that you have to simplify it a little bit more at the end. That one there and the one before it are definitely more complex, so probably your B standard questions. So just maybe note that with the asterisk. But if you're going okay with the first 3, then you should be right for today's activity. So rather than do some questions out of the textbook, this worksheet is from our online text. It's got some examples at the top of the page, but otherwise we can just start straight down at question 1, and I'm going to do the first 2 with you. So we've got m squared minus 16 equals, we have a perfect square minus another perfect square. So the square root of those go in the brackets. They've already put the m, so the square root of 16 is 4. 1 bracket's plus 4, 1 bracket's minus 4. Number 2, you've got a perfect square minus a perfect square. So the square root of each will go in the brackets. So square root of 9 is 3. So 3 at the front of the bracket, and the square root of w squared, which is w at the end. So as you go through these, if you realize you've got a perfect square minus another perfect square, set up your brackets, plus and minus, and put your square roots in. There's a little clue when you get down to the next box that you might need to take out your highest common factor first, but they've started the first one for you.